Of truth, and I get to follow a flying car. So yeah, this is a big one. So my name is Maria Naggaga. You can find me on the Twitters at Lady Naggaga. So the way to think about pronouncing my name is think of Lady Gaga and then put an NA in front of the Gaga. So funny fact about my handle, I was named by a telemarketer. So a telemarketer called me up, I was complaining about my cell phone visual, and she's like, I can't pronounce your name. It's like Lady Gaga, so you're Maria Naggaga. So it's pretty interesting because most times when people call me on the phone and it's telemarketers, it's like, hello, Miss Maria Naggaga. So this is really, really interesting. So I have two confessions to make. One, I am brand new to web development, so don't judge me. Two, this is not a technical talk. It's more of an inspirational talk on how to bring all technologies to new people. So every single time I mention ASP.NET to the developer audience that I speak to as an evangelist, which is predominantly students and young startups, I get one of these two responses. It's either legacy or what? Like literally, what is this? So legacy is a really tricky word to use because it means a lot of things to different people. Legacy can mean limited. And limited in a sense that it could be limited edition. That could be a good thing. It could be accessible by a few people, but could be really, really good. Legacy could also mean exclusive, premium quality, it's guaranteed. And if you think about the way enterprise has used ASP.NET in the past, this has been true. But sometimes, especially with the audience that I deal with as an evangelist, legacy means outdated. Now, it's not outdated in a sense that we no longer care about it, but it's outdated in the sense that people don't know about it. And because of that, it's become isolating to particular people. But I like to think of legacy in a more memorable, fun way because I come from a place of love. So, how many of you are Fresh Prince of Bel-Air fans? I loved Fresh Prince, right? And it was the first show I was allowed to watch alone, which didn't require parental guidance. So when I think about legacy, I think about great things like Fresh Prince, the first thing that made me laugh. So hands up, and it's okay to date yourself. How many of you know what this is used for? I'm going to pick on someone in the audience. Just do it. Exactly, you use it to rewind the tape. So a lot of the audience, just put in perspective, that I work with were born after 1995. So when they say this, they're like, why do you have a pencil near an iPhone cover? Well, for me, this was not only rewinding. Being one of the youngest of 6 siblings, I was a rewinder. My older sisters would call me and say, Maria, it's time to rewind the tape. So a 5-year-old me would run around swinging it like a game. And basically, I was their auto-reminder. The Walkman. Now, the Walkman was cool. When I was growing up, I used to see my older sisters with Walkman, and I was like, one day, I will have it. And then when that one day came, it was the iPod. Then VHS. How many of you had rooms growing up that were dedicated to VHS? Right? Dedicated. And then if you were lucky, you'd get one that's 120 minutes. So if you had a 3-hour movie, you'd have to wait, interchange, put it in, and you'd never know what those 3 minutes between the change would be. My first cell phone, right? And not only was this my first cell phone, it was a hand-me-down. I got a hand-me-down cell phone. And this was really cool because it did exactly what I wanted it to do. It sent text messages. No, it didn't even send text messages. It didn't even save numbers. I was able to call. So you basically would still walk around with an address book. The floppy disk. Oh my God, this sounds like ancient history, but I was in the New York Library last week, and I actually saw someone with a floppy disk, so my reaction was, what are you doing, and where is it going, and what kind of machine do you have that's going to use this? The best video game ever, right? James Bond, Nintendo 64, the last video game I ever played, and it was worth it. And remember when we had this misconception that if I blow on it, I'll fix everything? So you're caught, and when it doesn't work, you're shocked? Our first browser, right? The first thing that opened us up to the world. How many of you remember WordPerfect? I was shocked that I found a screenshot of WordPerfect. But WordPerfect was enabled us to actually write documentations where you didn't need training. It was, anyone could use it anywhere. COBOL, now this was before my time, so I actually feel quite nice about this. This was before my time, but COBOL was the first people's interaction to programming. And Pascal. And then Micromedia, how many of you remember these? Dreamweaver, Flash, Cold Fusion. Dreamweaver was my first IDE. It was my first experience. So what I'm trying to say here is that it's all the same. We're just moving through evolution. So it's just like how when you think about Batman, when Batman came out, it was a classic. It was amazing. We had some new add-ons in the 1960s when we had Robin, so he had a sidekick. Then we had Michael Keaton, who to me is still one of the greatest Batmans ever. I remember my friends coming over, we'd watch it, it was exciting. No matter how bad the movie got, we kept on going. And then we had Val Kilmer and George Clooney, which we choose to forget ever happened. It's like, never happened. It never, ever, ever happened. And then it came up again, right? We had Christian Bale, and he made Batman cool to the extent that the Joker was amazing, that we loved Heath Ledger more than we loved Christian Bale. So when we're thinking about technology, it's kind of the same thing, it just looks different over time. So for me, who loved Michael Keaton, I also loved Christian Bale. And to the younger generation who didn't know Michael Keaton, Christian Bale still made Batman really, really cool. So ASP.NET now. Now, confession, as I told you, I'm really new to the web. I touched the web for the first time as a developer in November last year, as a challenge from a colleague of mine to try something new. Now, as an evangelist, I work with a variety of developers, predominantly students, university, a lot of game developers, indie developers, and a huge number of web developers. So to the web developers, the question about ASP.NET is why, right? Why in this day and age would I be looking at ASP.NET? What does it do for me, and how can I work with it? So when most people think of ASP.NET, they think about Windows, predominantly Visual Studio, and being consumed to one platform, right? You can only know one way to do things in one particular environment. So let's look about developing the web today. So I don't know about you guys, but developing the web today is a beast. Do people agree? Like, it's a huge number of things that you have to do to get things going. So I used to call it a beast, but when you think about it more than anything else, it's the ability to be flexible and to work with various libraries to tell a story. So I found this really cool screenshot. I love Napoleon Dynamite, so this worked best. So I'm a developer. A basic web developer in 2004 installs Node, installs Bower, picks from a ridiculous number of CS frameworks that they can work with, picks a responsive approach, has a billion other things to do, and then at the end they pick HTML. So when I first saw this, I was like, wow, the web is becoming really, really cool. Because when I went to school, and I graduated from school 3 years ago, we couldn't even get credit for doing a web class. I don't know if it's the same for everybody else, but you had to be hardcore in object-oriented programming. But the web has come so far. So when I think about the web right now, I think about it as an adventure. I find that every single web developer that I'm meeting so far is a fearless coder. For them, it's all about trying something new and being willing to try. So last week, we hosted NASA Space Apps at the Microsoft office. And we spent the whole week working on a photo booth, which was built entirely on Node.js and used a whole bunch of libraries. So it was hours after hours of trying all these new things, and predominantly everyone on my team is C# and Java. And then we have Stacy on our team, who's a web developer. So when she saw this project, she tried like a million different frameworks in one afternoon to make it work. And I found that incredibly inspiring. So it comes back to why are we looking at ASP.NET right now? And why would it be flexible to the current web developer as they stand? So we all know this, ASP.NET is truly cross-platform. It actually enables you to build in an environment that you're used to, and complete flexibility. Most importantly, it's open source. Now, for the web developer and the student developer that I work with, open source is incredibly important to them. Because right now, as a student, being a CS student, it is completely and utterly competitive, right? It's not enough to be the best in your class. It's not enough to have done a bunch of interviews. But it's more important to know the projects that you've been working on. And open source provides you with that gateway to be part of a community. So once you tell this story to the developers that I'm working with, it changes to why ASP.NET to I'm interested. They're finally listening to you, and they're willing to start the conversation. So when starting a conversation, it's more important to think about what's familiar to a developer. So how many people here use Visual Studio on a daily basis? How many of you use other IDEs? What are some of the IDEs that you use? Eclipse, right? That reminds me of school. Yes. IntelliJ. Xamarin Studio, right? And you have to listen on. So I was trying the first time the group I had sold it to, right? I had gone it was kind of like I was, as a true evangelist, I was going from school to school selling the word of ASP.NET. So I was like, I'm going to make it really simple for you. I am going to show you how to do it in Visual Studio. File, new project, boom, right? You have your ASP.NET vNext project up and running. And Visual Studio makes it really simple for you, right? We have Grunt, Task, Bower, Gulp. They're all inbuilt into the project. So it's up to you as a developer to customize it, right? So I remember sitting in the classroom, and I was sitting in a classroom in the Microsoft office, and I had a bunch of startups in, a couple of students in, and I showed this to them, and they were really excited, but nobody was following along. And I was like, guys, what's up? They're like, yeah, we like Visual Studio, it's great, but it takes us like about an hour or two, or even sometimes 5 hours to download it. So in the situation that I was trying to show it to them in, it wasn't really working for the developer that I was trying to reach. So I had to go back and rethink how I was going to bring this to a new audience. So I wrote this blog post, Getting Started on ASP.NET vNext Running on a Mac, Shazam. So how many of you are Marvel fans? Or DC Comic, right? No, not really, kind of? Okay, so I love Shazam because in an instant he just shouts this huge word, Shazam, and he's a superhero from a little boy, right? And that's kind of the way I think about the way you can develop for vNext on a Mac, right? In a couple of lines of code, you're able to deploy to the cloud. So it's all about command line. So one thing that I had to learn on my side, it wasn't about doing file, new project, and then having a miracle. But it was all about having control of your environment. So within 12 to 13 lines of command written in terminal or command prompt, I was able to set up my environment. And this is the power of command line. I was surprised to see how many students, indie developers, loved using the command line. It was important for them to have control of their environment. And vNext is in a place that you can actually do this. It's also bringing them to things that they're familiar with, like Node. So how many people here are web developers, right? How many of you get things done without Node? Oh, wow, okay, this is the first. Like, usually the audience that I talk to, when they're just like, no, everything's done through Node. Like, everything for them is done through Node. Yeoman, how many of you have heard of Yeoman? How many of you have used Yeoman? How awesome is Yeoman? It's pretty awesome, right? Like Yeoman is this great scaffolding tool that allows you to actually install your instance and put in generators of ASP.NET and customize them as you'd like. So it's similar to going to File New Project. What I liked about using it from this perspective was I was able to actually figure out how everything came together. Not only that, it's so open source that you can actually write your own generator, right? So OmniShop has written a really great generator for ASP.NET, and it's something that I really encourage you all to contribute to and look into. So when you open it up and you download it, it's something really familiar, right? It looks exactly like it would look like in Visual Studio. Easy to access. So even to someone who's coming from Visual Studio like myself, this is something that I could completely relate to. But what actually made this really interesting for me, especially for someone who's brand new to the web, is that I was able to put all the pieces together. I was able to understand, using the command line, how the model, view, and control all work together. So even becoming more comfortable with foreign tools to myself for things like Sublime, right? So how many of you have heard of Culture? Only one person has heard of Culture? So Culture enables you to actually run ASP.NET in Sublime. So it's a really quick and easy way to get started. So these are all things that were brand new to me, but incredibly relevant to the community that I was working with, because these are all workflows that they're used to doing. So working in things like Sublime are incredibly important. So I was brand new to Sublime, and when I first got my Visual Studio, when I first got my project, I had no idea to run it. So it was really interesting to see other tools that you could add into Sublime to make it run. On top of that, it's also really good for you to understand how you put this all together. And especially for students as an educator, it's really important to understand how they build compilers so they can add to this project. You can also run it in brackets, which is really, really cool. So this is the part when I'm going to go around the stage and talk about more about what we've been talking about at .NET, .Fringe. With everything that we've learned today, it's really important, and over the past 2 to 4 days, is not just stand there, but be part of the conversation. This is something that I actively encourage the students and startups that I work with to do. As I said before, it's really important for these guys to have a competitive angle. And there's nothing better than having one more language or tool under your belts, right? So for me, embracing something like the web, and especially for ASP.NET, it gave me a voice. It also gave me a new community that I could reach out to. Because when we're thinking about continuing and building a legacy, we're thinking about reaching and growing to different audiences. And for me, reaching different audiences is actually reaching someone you usually wouldn't. So with everything that you've learned today, I would actually really encourage you to take those and actually introduce them to somebody you wouldn't necessarily introduce it to. So my talk, as I told you, is really brief. My name is Maria Naggaga. I'm a technical evangelist at Microsoft. You can reach me at Lady Naggaga, and my blog post, please do not check it because I haven't updated it since November. Please don't judge me, is marianaggaga.com. But more than anything, I would really love you guys to open up to any questions that you have right now. So yeah, that's a good question. So I'll repeat it. So his question was, for students, what is the selling point for ASP.NET? Most importantly, it's open source. Students love the fact that they're contributing to something, and it was actually a really interesting learning curve for me, because as a student, I love to just stay in my hole, do all my homework, and I really didn't care about the outside world. But on top of that, it's all the other things that you can use with ASP.NET that is really influential to them. I was actually really surprised as well as how much they actually love C# in comparison to PHP, because it actually makes sense to what they're doing. And there's this huge move, especially with TypeScript, that they really love to be a part of. So it's a flexibility that the open source of ASP.NET has brought, as well as C#, which they really like. Yeah. Yeah, okay, majority of the professors are still sticking with Java. They'll love it until the end of the days, right? They'll never let go. They will never let go. And they're using a lot of C++. But then you're finding those few really interesting independent professors who are in schools like Parsons and Pratt, the creative coders who are more open to different things like C#. So that's been an ongoing battle, but it's a trend that's picking up, because I think professors are also, like, I use this loosely, like Microsoft, are actually keeping up with the trends as well. Any other questions?
So in your outreach to the students, are you also reaching out to the professors and trying to talk to them about kind of updating what they're teaching and that sort of thing?
Definitely, and I have to say this has really helped. The fact that we're open sourcing a few things is really important, because when professors hear Microsoft, it's almost like it's pitch and fork. They want to get to you, because they always think as a way that we're going to sell their students new things, or we're trying to enforce a particular platform on them. So actually introducing things like .NET has actually helped the conversation. They're not willing to introduce it in the classrooms yet, but they're actually willing to promote it as a language of choice for the later years. Is your hand up? Oh, okay. Okay.
So as we progress in a more open source world, we've been open source for a long time.
Yeah.
Even more now than ever. I mean, when I went to school, obviously high school and college, I wasn't really involved in the open source community. I didn't understand the tooling behind Git or GitHub
Yep.
or anything like this. Like, do you see this actually being taught? It's a very integral part of a day-to-day job, where I didn't learn about source control until I was out in school. Why? Like, now it's more important for young kids and students to actually be social and understand how Git and how are you bringing, or do you see a trend towards teaching this somehow, or how can we do our part as developers to bring Git and bring source control, bring this community together?
So, okay, to answer your first question, is source control being taught in schools these days? It actually is, and GitHub is the tool of choice, right? Professors are demanding that their students are constantly updating their projects. It's usually the 3rd to 4th year students who are using it, and it's a tool of choice. You're expected to have a GitHub repository when you're interviewing for a job. So I'm shocked when I get resumes for students who are applying for jobs at Microsoft. I'm shocked if I don't see a GitHub repository, even though I'm guilty of I don't have one. I don't have one. And then as developers, it's really important for us to share. And that's one thing we're not doing enough of. Like, being able to share your individual project is really important for the next generation to become better developers. So I don't know if any of you watch Silicon Valley. You must. People must watch Silicon Valley on the show. It's like how we don't want that mentality of hoarding stuff. We want that mentality of sharing stuff. So it's nice to see famous developers like Phil and Scott Hanselman sharing their code, because it makes it more accessible. If they're doing it, more people should be doing it.
Kind of related, once they're interested in .NET, what's the best thing we can do as a community to be welcoming to it as well?
Yeah, the best thing as a community, their interest in .NET is one big thing, is the increase of enterprise jobs that are open sourcing use .NET, right? So it's just one other opportunity where they could work. So you have things like Goldman Sachs, Ernst & Young, PwC, right? It also creates an opportunity for them to have job experience. As .NET developers, it's also being able to work in tools. So if you're a .NET developer who's trying to reach out to a younger group or a new group, it's also really important for you to use tools that are relevant to you. As I gave that example of, I used Visual Studio, and it was just like, too much work, right? And then I used Sublime, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. So that blog post that I wrote was the most successful blog post I've ever written. Like, I actually got tweeted and retweeted by people, and I was like, people are actually Googling, or Binging, as I should say, and my name shows up. That's huge, right? Because that means it's something that people are looking for. The fact that if you look at .NET on a Mac, and I'm one of the search results, that means people are actually looking for that solution.
I think his question is also like, what could we, like us in the audience here, do to help welcome those new people, new students?
Do you know what I would love to see? I would love us to do a .NET tour across major campuses in the United States. I'd like us to get people who are building .NET, especially in the open source community, coming to these schools and telling them why it's important. Once we start doing that, we build new fans, and then we become a legacy where it's more about the glory days and the continuation and growth of it.
So we should get out and talk to people.
I think you should get out and talk to people all the time. Like, I spend my whole day talking and convincing people all the time. Like, I wonder if people still believe me anymore, but that's what I do every single day. Still have 2 minutes. Any questions? No? Okay. Thank you.